Anne here, and this is More Than a Love Interest, the show where we talk about the arcs of female characters in film. Today, we are talking about what should be considered one of the best movies in the MCU, and my personal favorite, Black Widow.
Let's go.
We're going to get into how it was clearly made by women,
I like your vest.
God, I knew it. I knew you did. It's so cool, right?
how it develops Natasha's character,
Is this your haunted past?
and the real hot topic these days, how it confronts generational trauma.
You were my real mother. The closest thing I ever had to one.
Let's get started. Alright, let me just say that by watching this movie, well, as they say, my skin is clear, my crops are watered, my depression is cured. There are a few reasons for that, but the first one I want to get into is how this movie is almost tailor-made for me specifically. Well, for Black Widow fans.
We played our roles to perfection.
I think we did pretty great.
And after my in-depth analysis of her other films, I was floored by how obviously they were paying attention to the details from Natasha's other appearances to weave together a thoroughly fleshed out character. Her important bits of backstory from Avengers, her characterization from Winter Soldier, reframing the more sexist moments from Iron Man 2 and Age of Ultron to center her as a person, and finally finding out what happens at the end of Civil War after she disappears for the last third of that movie.
You got no friends. Where are you gonna go?
I've lived a lot of lives before I met you, Ross.
But more than that, I was really struck by how this movie is just my dream female-driven story in a way that is surprising for a character who had previously served more as story fuel in the films and even the comics, rather than being her own independent character.
I'm actually better on my own.
I will get into Nat's character arc more in the next section, but let's talk about how this movie was made by and for women, and importantly, not to the exclusion of men.
Aw, he's sensitive. See why you keep him around.
Hopefully, you're convinced that this movie does not dislike dudes. If not, well,
You are sensitive.
stick around, I guess, please. But I do want to get into what makes it really obviously made by women, because there are a lot of great touches. Let's start with the superficial. First, the clothes of all the women on screen. Yeah, many of the characters are wearing figure-hugging tack suits.
It still fits.
But the camera does not linger on this, and they're not especially tight. As we've moved through the MCU, Nat's costumes have been increasingly practical and durable, and that is especially true here. The character design for widows in the comics is taken to its most realistic extreme, rather than anything reflecting the usual eye candy approach to having this many ladies on screen.
Let's drink.
And the hair. I honestly can't remember the last time I felt this scene with hairstyles. Most of the characters have long hair, but it is usually braided and often messy. Unlike many of Nat's own previous appearances, no one has impractically long hair flying around and looking recently brushed in the middle of a battle. Basically, the messiness of all the ladies is something I relate to on a personal level, and it's just chef's kiss.
Your hair when you're fighting.
Similarly, you can tell women worked on this because of the vest.
That?
I can't say for certain how early this was implemented into the script. Natasha had worn it years earlier in Infinity War, after all. But the fact that it is utilitarian, has a bunch of pockets, and comes to represent both Yelena's independence from the Red Room.
You know, this is the first piece of clothing I've ever bought for myself. I've never had control over my own life before, and now I do. I want to do things.
And then her relationship with Natasha, well,
I know how much you like it. Shucks.
that's an impressive amount of work for an item of clothing we saw for only about 5 minutes on screen in another movie.
You couldn't have told me sooner?
Don't throw a fit.
There wasn't time.
Okay.
And that level of attention is paid to everything Nat does. What she does in her downtime, what she's wearing, all are consistent and make sense for a real person to do as we follow her through the film. And the other ladies get the same treatment. Next, there is, of course, the reframing of Natasha as a widow in the MCU, such as calling out her pose here, or what I think we can all agree is the worst decision in the MCU here.
Yeah, that's what happens when the Red Room gives you an involuntary hysterectomy. You just get right in there, and they chop them all away.
As I talked about in the Age of Ultron video, Nat is canonically sterile in the comics, but it's because of the serum she's taken and is a side effect, not the intention. Much like how Bruce and Steve and probably others are sterile. Singling her out like this was frankly a deeply misogynistic choice, and I am very happy to have it actually reframed as something horrific to happen to Natasha because of how it violated her bodily autonomy against her will. Like how anyone who thinks of women as people would probably present it.
I don't get my period, dipshit.
Another thing I love is how important female relationships are to this film. Natasha has a strong relationship with Yelena.
Zvani. Moja malenkaya sestra.
She reconciles with Melina when they have a heart-to-heart.
You were just born in a cage, but that's not your fault.
She struggles with her guilt and makes amends with Antonia.
I'm sorry.
And she feels responsible for the other widows.
How many others?
Enough.
But we also get one of my favorite moments in the film with Melina and Yelena.
Yelena, it's me, it's Mama.
We see that Yelena has a strong relationship with the other widows.
You came back for us. Me to be honest,
And even the widows with Antonia.
Don't worry. We're bringing her with us.
This movie centers those relationships as essential to the plot in a way that, frankly, few movies I've seen do. It's especially refreshing to see female relationships be complicated and require working through without any of the competition that is so often a crutch to stir up drama with women. Especially since the Red Room of the comics is generally shown to be competitive, and the comics versions of Melina and Yelena are introduced to compete with Nat for the Black Widow title.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm afraid the comics have often relied on competition with other women for Natasha's storylines, which is unfortunate. Honestly, this movie takes a situation in which women are canonically forced to compete, and instead turns it into a story about working together to heal trauma and overcome a common enemy. Love that for us.
I'm putting away my weapon.
Frankly, the fact that it's just ladies relating to ladies without it being a thing, a girl boss moment or whatever, is why I think it's definitely one of the best MCU films. It's very natural. The widows are all female, and this movie is about bringing down the Red Room, so it is at its heart a female-driven story beyond just being female-led.
I'm at the hand. You get to make your own choices now.
Okay, next, the exclusion of men. Because, here's my hot take, celebrating women does not mean bringing men down. Both can be good, actually. And I think this movie does that perfectly.
Today's your lucky day, Alexei.
So let me break down the plot of Black Widow, and we'll see how important gender is to it. Sibling of Protagonist freed from control, escapes Big Bad. Protagonist is on the run because teammates broke up. Protagonist runs into Antagonist, survives, and brings MacGuffin to Sibling. Siblings escape agents, and Antagonist sent after them, go rescue former colleague. Then all go to another former colleague. They decide to work together to take down the Big Bad. Twist with Antagonist. Protagonist and Sibling are successful and reconcile with the other antagonists and their former colleagues. The end. Alright, as you can see, gender isn't really part of the main plot. It is not ignored by the story as a whole, as I'll get into in a moment, but Natasha isn't succeeding in spite of the men around her. The Big Bad isn't male because men are bad, but more because people who sit behind a desk and control everyone's free will is bad.
To him, we are just things. Weapons with no face that he can just throw away.
Alexei is male and often the comic relief, but he gets moments of pathos, and he's not the only comic relief around. This movie is very funny, by the way.
They think.
I don't think we have enough fuel for St. Petersburg.
Might change your plan. I completely demolished one of the engines and we are going into a controlled crash.
Ugh, that was disgusting.
Where are my keys?
And I just wanted to point out how the sense of humor does differ from much of the MCU, or at least from the main complaints of the MCU, like you can see in this video. We don't have a heavy moment that is undercut with a joke. The Red Room being a flying fortress is not something to wink at us about. The immersion is complete. Though there are metatextual things happening with Nat and her role in the MCU being considered here, that's another video. Anyway, the humor does not detract from how seriously the audience perceives what is happening in this movie.
My father, he go toilet on my hands.
Oh my.
And they were singing. Bye.
They took Nat's basically comic relief characterization from Winter Soldier and applied it to everyone here, which makes it delightful, in my opinion.
I don't slouch. You're going to get the back hunch.
Listen to your mother.
Oh my god, this...
Back to gender, though. Everyone gets to be funny. Everyone gets to do something helpful for the plot. Everyone gets to have personal moments with our protagonists to develop their characters. Alexei and Mason are the main male characters, and they do get teased, but not really more than anyone else.
Such a poser.
More importantly, they are minor characters. Natasha and Yelena are the main characters. They have the emotional stakes with the villain. They have the relationship that develops. If you look at any other MCU films and you remove the characters with direct connections to the antagonists, you will find a lot more characters treated like Alexei or Mason. Often with less pathos, honestly, since, again, both do get to reconcile with the protagonist in a meaningful way at the end of the film.
Be good for me to hear it, really.
I'm impressed.
Okay, now I do have to get into content that's a bit darker, because there is an underlying narrative related to the gender of our characters that I think is important to mention. Dreykov is reprehensible because he kidnapped and almost certainly murdered untold numbers of young girls.
He takes more every day. Maybe 1 in 20 survives the training, becomes a widow, the rest he kills.
Those who survive the brutal training could look forward to a life of absolute servitude, at least by Yelena's time.
Dreykov has chemically subjugated agents planted around the globe.
But even for Natasha and Melina, loyalty was enforced chemically with the pheromone lock, which is from the Black Widow comics, by the way, though I definitely prefer this version.
What are you going to do?
Sever the nerve.
Anyway, I can't speak to how any of the rest of you grew up, but I have certainly been taught to be aware of situations from which I might be kidnapped for as long as I can remember. So I feel pretty safe in saying that most women are brought up to view any public situation as one in which they may be trafficked, taken, if you will. I mean, that's why we go to the restroom in groups, isn't it? So you might think I would prefer not to see this sort of ever-present boogeyman presented on screen. However, the fact that Natasha was able to escape once
I needed out.
and then came back later to join with her sisters so they can destroy the Red Room once and for all is actually very cathartic.
This was fun!
The relationship the women in this film have with the villain is what I think takes it definitively out of the girl boss, girl power cliche.
Can you see the merchandising? Action figures?
Crack operatives in their own field. They're the martial arts expert, counter-espionage agent, explosives expert, master of disguise.
What? What?
Girl power.
And into something much more meaningful. They are overcoming a horrific wrong where they were targeted for nothing beyond their gender.
Children who don't have anyone to protect them. Just like us when we were small.
Because he feels that
Only natural resource that the world has too much of. Girls.
And I don't want to get too into human trafficking here on this video about my favorite MCU film, but up to 50,000 young women are trafficked in the United States every year, and this has been increasing during the pandemic, which I only mention because I can almost guarantee that every woman watching can relate to this issue on a personal level. And we want that bastard Dracoff dead more than any other villain in the MCU. If you don't think he's worse than the majority of villains put to screen, perhaps you just need to pay a little more attention. Now I bring this up because I often start videos with discussing the reasons the hot takes one finds online about female characters are incorrect.
I didn't raise my girls to fall in traps.
But honestly, the complaint about Dracoff being a weak villain was the main one I felt worth my time to discuss. Though only briefly, because it just seems like an empathy problem if I'm being honest.
And those agents you chemically subjugated around the globe? That was me.
I don't want to do this. Is it God?
The majority of criticism for this movie comes from dudes who for some reason don't like it when the main character is not their gender. When the characters like them are relegated to background or side characters. When their favorite character just kind of disappears at the end and doesn't get any kind of arc. To whom I'll only say, wow, that must be so hard for you. I can't even imagine.
I'm sorry. Did I step on your moment?
Alright, next, let's talk about Natasha's character arc, which is very thorough in this one.
I'm actually better on my own.
As usual, we will be using Maureen Murdock's Heroine's Journey, link in the description. The first step of the journey is to separate from the feminine. Since Nat is sort of on two arcs simultaneously, both of which are resolved by the end, this feminine could be considered as either her place in the Avengers or her place in the Russian family.
You okay?
Why wouldn't it be?
Who cares? That wasn't real.
The opening scene shows her separation from the latter, first showing us their dynamic, making clear that she doesn't want to leave.
I'm sorry.
And then giving her the role of getting them out of that situation. She is further separated from each member of her family and will be reunited with them in reverse order. But we'll get back to that. For the Avengers, of course, we don't see that separation, but we see her escape Ross and cut off contact.
Natasha Romanoff är på fri fot och på rymmen.
This emphasizes the separation as more extreme than we previously saw it, which adds depth to her arc when we see her back with everyone in the next movie. The second step on the journey is gaining masculine allies. This step is a little unusual for Nat, since she continues to resist having any allies, basically until the climax of the film. In most cases, the heroine will be glad to have allies in her new place in life, and eventually finds them insufficient. She has to reclaim the feminine by the end. Nat does eventually let them in, but it takes a while.
I'll make it up to you.
The first masculine ally is Rick Mason, who helps her stay off the grid. In the comics, he is known as the Agent and has helped Carol Danvers in the past, not really interacting with Nat, but she is often shown as having a web of safe houses when she needs to stay under the radar. I especially like this reference. Though Nat is otherwise separated from everyone, from where she had a purpose and a family, Mason is her ally.
Because you can tell me, that's the way the whole friends thing works.
I know.
Even if she insists on keeping the relationship strictly professional.
And I don't pay you to worry.
I would also argue that Yelena serves the role of masculine ally.
Is that what we are?
Unlike Mason, she does accompany Nat through the road of trials and the rest of the movie.
Could be fun, though.
In terms of feminine versus masculine, with either family serving as the feminine, Yelena is antagonistic about Nat's role in both of her families.
You just didn't want your baby sister to tag along whilst you saved the world with the cool kids. And the Avengers aren't really your family.
Nat even tells her they were not sisters, emphasizing her current separation that needs to be resolved.
You weren't really my sister.
You can tell it needs to be resolved because Yelena makes this face. The road of trials is the third step where the heroine faces dangers with her allies. I'm going to use poetic license to say that her allies are with her, at least in spirit, when she faces her first trial. Taskmaster coming after her. This trial is sort of brought on by her allies, both Mason and Yelena, and they take her through the next steps. Getting to Budapest.
No, it's Budapest.
Budapest. Budapest.
Budapest.
Whatever.
Fighting Yelena, fighting the widows, escaping Antonia, getting away successfully.
Yeah, great plan. I love the part where I almost bled to death.
Less of an obvious trial, but getting things out in the open with Yelena is certainly a challenge for Nat, who tends not to share anything about herself. I would also say this scene in particular is probably fairly cathartic.
What is your story?
I never let myself be alone long enough to think about it.
Getting to talk to someone who actually went through the same thing she did, not having to hide her past to avoid getting looks like this.
Did you have a choice?
It's not your fault. You didn't know what you were doing.
You're not a threat to me. None of that's your fault, Steve. No one blames you, Bruce. Don't do that to yourself, Clint.
This scene also mimics the rejection of the call from the hero's journey, because Nat has a chance to just go back to where we found her at the beginning of the film, to go her separate ways from Yelena.
Where are you gonna go?
I don't know.
It was more like an invitation.
To go to the Red Room and kill Dreykov?
But she chooses not to, and both of them accept the call to be heroes.
That sounds like a shitload of work.
Yep.
If not instead of trained killers,
And we are both still a trained killer.
then at least in addition to it.
Could be fun, though.
Yep.
The fourth step is the illusion of success, where the heroine finds her masculine allies have let her down.
Aw, he's sensitive. See why you keep him around.
On the funnier side is how Mason lets her down.
I said we needed a jet.
Yeah, you know what you didn't give me? Time or money. I'm not made of jets.
Not getting her a jet, and then this whole bit.
No, we're good. We'll make it.
Okay.
Which is peak comedic timing. This movie has fantastic jokes.
We're both doing a really good job.
I also just want to say this is a pretty direct reference to the comics, except there, Natasha teams up with Sharon Carter to save Bucky Barnes from a gulag, which you can say is a coincidence. Most American-made media with Russian plots has a similar idea, except Bucky is fighting a bear in the comics, and this dude's called Ursa.
Why are you calling me a liar, Ursa? Huh?
Plus there's this reference where Nat insists Bucky needs a bath in the comics, and, well...
Let go of me now. You smell really bad.
Anyway, the other illusion is how the last trial on their road, the pretty big one where they rescue Alexei from the prison, is ultimately not as helpful as hoped.
Why the aggression, huh?
Now, this movie does the usual spy thriller climax, where things aren't revealed to the audience in advance, and seeming to fail just shows some failsafe the heroes put into place without us knowing.
Thank you for your cooperation.
Because of that, the illusion of success is a little harder to pinpoint, but I do think this is the moment where it happens.
Well, where are they now? Where is that family now?
Tell me where the Red Room is.
Mainly because, though Nat has been resisting returning to the feminine, i.e. becoming a family again, that is what is necessary for her. Her illusion is that fetching Alexei will give them a way to the Red Room. It doesn't, and that means she will have to go back to a full family dinner experience. The fifth step is the moment where the heroine reaches her lowest point emotionally. The dinner goes about as disastrously as family dinners can go, with Nat trying to hold on to the professional relationship, but it falling apart.
The best part of my life was fake, and none of you told me.
It's the lowest point for really all of the characters as they air out that generational trauma, which I'll explore in the next section.
And you? You got out.
But Nat's lowest point is probably here, where she and Melina talk about her real mother.
I thought about her every day of my life. Whether or not I admitted it to myself, I did.
And Nat finds out she wasn't.
Abandoned in the street like garbage.
Now, the comics are not consistent with her backstory. Comics are rarely consistent, by the way. In most of those, she was adopted by Ivan Petrovich, presumably referenced here in Endgame.
Natasha, daughter of Ivan.
Nothing is ever mentioned about her real parents, so I actually love this addition to her backstory.
You were selected by a program that assessed the genetic potential in infants.
For one thing, I think I speak for us all when I say I am extremely tired of female characters getting parent reveals that focus on who their father is as an explanation of who they are.
How is this relevant?
You know, fathers.
But Nat finds out she had a mother who loved her.
But your mother, she never stopped looking for you.
And how this really made Nat into whom she is.
Like you in that way, she was relentless.
Nat escaped the Red Room and came back to it because of the traits she inherited from her real mother, as well as how having the family in Ohio,
My girls were the toughest girls in the world.
impacted all of them and made them want more than what the Red Room had to offer.
You were just born in a cage, but that's not your fault.
So as low as the dinner makes her feel, this conversation helps get her and everyone else to the next step.
Let's not keep him waiting.
In mythology, the descent is most obviously found in, for example, Persephone going to the underworld. Natasha, however, does not descend. She ascends, both literally and figuratively.
Now you'll know how Draco stayed above the radar all these years.
Because honestly, we've seen her descend enough. Getting some resolution with Melina and a better understanding of her real mother helps her ascend to accept and reclaim who she is. As she says to Dreykov later,
He took my childhood. He took my choices and tried to break me.
But he didn't, because of who her parents made her. And I include Melina and Alexei in this.
I want them to follow their dreams.
No good.
Reach for the stars.
Never let him take your heart.
The important part of this ascent, from a character arc perspective, is that it gives our hero the strength and clarity she needs to resolve her separation. In this case, Nat is healing that separation from both of her families.
So once we're inside, I'll activate my tracker and Russ will come running. I'll give it to you later.
The next step is urgently yearning to reconnect to the feminine. In this case, Nat's families. First, it's a bit of a deleted scene, but she also says it in the theatrical cut.
She left a note for you.
I'll activate my tracker.
She is not yet ready, as far as we know, to resolve the separation from the Avengers, but she does urgently need those resources.
Here comes the cavalry.
Even if she and her family are successful with the plan she and Melina made, they're still gonna need some help, and Ross is the only one to make sure everyone from the Red Room is investigated. There is also the reconnection with her pseudo-mother, Melina. After their talk about how Nat got out, Melina is willing to join her plan and take down the Red Room herself.
Tell me, how did you keep your heart?
What you taught me kept me alive.
I completely demolished one of the engines and we were going into a controlled crash.
So Nat is, rather urgently, accepting her family as real so they can face the Red Room and Dreykov together.
I'm sorry.
In the 8th step, the heroine heals the split with the feminine. Nat does this by returning to the Red Room with her family in tow. For her larger arc, Nat is healing a split within herself, where she found she had abandoned the other widows and needs to save them.
Dreykov is not a fantasy, it's unfinished business.
She also needs to heal one of her biggest regrets, saving Dreykov's daughter from all the horrible things that have happened to her. Both of these will take until the end of the movie, so the more relevant split that has been healed is that the family is back together again.
Yelena, it's me, it's Mama.
The second to last step is making peace with the wounded masculine. The easiest answer for this is reconciling with Alexei, even if he never quite gets to speak to her about it.
You got something to say?
Let's just mess it up.
So maybe this doesn't fit, and the only other masculine character is Dreykov, with whom she definitely does not make peace.
Sever the nerve.
Later on, in the last scene, she basically reconciles with Mason.
You've always been a really good friend to me.
Which is nice, but not really an essential step on her journey. So I would say the more relevant interpretation of this step is how she makes peace with the wounded, masculine or not. First, with the other widows, though Yelena is of course instrumental in this, but Nat is also making up for leaving by ensuring all the other widows can be found and freed, as well as these ones, which is a very personal and important mission for her.
You get to make your own choices now.
Next, she also makes peace with Yelena. First, she tries to keep her from killing Dreykov because her sister is too precious to be allowed to go out that way.
Don't do it!
Then she jumps after her to get her a parachute so she survives the fall. And of course, there is this conversation where peace is completely achieved.
It was real to me too.
Finally, she makes peace with Antonia. As with Yelena, she initially does this by saving her life.
I know you're still in there. And I'm not gonna leave you.
Then she saves more than her life. She frees her from the control she's been under for so long. And peace is achieved here as well.
I'm sorry. Is he gone? He's gone.
The final step is where the heroine integrates the masculine and the feminine to become a whole person. For Nat, that means accepting her allies and her families, as well as her role within them. So we first see her reconcile with her Russian family, including the other widows, and accept them all as part of who she is.
That's insanity. We fight. We fight with you.
I'll hold them off.
Natasha,
together.
Fight.
If it can work out with the four of us, there may be some hope for the Avengers.
Then, after the time jump, we see that she is on her way back to the Avengers, accepting that they are part of her family as well.
It's funny, my whole life I didn't think I had any family. Turns out I got two.
And we watch her walk away in a scene that bookends with the beginning of this film and with her first appearance in the MCU. So, overall thoughts on the journey. It's one of the best that I've seen. I've talked about Nat's journey using this framework in other films, but often had to skip or condense steps, or frankly stretch the material a bit to fit. But this one did not require that at all, and each step is fully fleshed out without having to infer what she's thinking during action scenes. It's great to see Nat finally have a chance to really shine and take us through a whole emotional journey with her. And the fact that the majority of side characters also get a bit of a character arc, at least in terms of reconciling their relationships with Natasha, makes it a really solid film. There are a lot of callbacks or bookends throughout the movie, setting up ideas that get repeated at important points later.
Because my girls are the toughest girls in the world.
I couldn't be more proud of you.
So I find watching it to be a very satisfying experience. Truly, it's one of the best films I've seen in years. Okay, so there is one more reason why I love this movie. And it's a big one.
What are the big ones?
It's this dichotomy. As I said before, there is a lot of great humor interspersed throughout. But at the end of the day, this is a story about overcoming trauma, and specifically generational trauma. A few recent films have earned some deserved acclaim for addressing generational trauma, and I think it's an integral aspect of Black Widow that isn't often discussed, despite that being what the movie is definitely about, both with the Russian family and Nat's other family breaking up.
Where is that family now?
Now, generational trauma is based on the idea that how your parents were raised is echoed in how you were raised and how you will raise your children. But like, the negative side of this. So not to get too heavy here, but as an example, substance abuse and domestic violence tend to be perpetrated through generations because what was considered normal at home as a child is difficult not to fall into as an adult. So that's what generational trauma is, and it can take a lot of forms. In Everything Everywhere All at Once, for example, the trauma is caused by unreasonably high standards and a pervading feeling that the child can never live up to them, which has a cathartic ending because mother and daughter reconcile to bring an end to that cycle.
I just want to share with you.
One way that Black Widow is unique is that it has essentially 3 generations sitting at the table. Melina.
I was cycled through the Red Room 4 times before you were even born.
Natasha, who has always looked after Yelena.
You weren't really my sister.
And Yelena herself.
It was real to me.
Let's start with Melina as the matriarch of this cycle. She's been in the Red Room a long time, and she has performed well enough to earn Dreykov's trust, to a unique extent.
Are you telling me that Melina is working for the Red Room present day?
Not only is she entrusted with the mission to Ohio, where she looked after 2 young widows in training and ensured they escaped with the needed intelligence, in the present, she is still trusted enough to work with her pigs on her own.
She works remotely outside St. Petersburg.
Obviously, she was not chemically subjugated after that became commonplace.
No, that's not my department.
And otherwise seems mostly retired. Not that her moves are rusty, of course, but she has been allowed to move into another position in a way that is unlikely to be common practice for widows. Though the widow from her generation is the one to devise the anti-serum, so perhaps it's not wholly uncommon.
The counteragent. It was synthesized in secret by an older widow from Melina's generation.
But I would guess not many widows live this long, implying that Melina is uniquely successful.
You cannot kill a fox that swift.
Ew.
On an emotional level, we know that she did not want to go back to the Red Room after being in Ohio.
I don't want to go.
And that she cherished the time she spent there.
No, leave it, leave it, leave it. Go wait in the car.
And why'd you save this?
However, despite this, she still accepted her place in the cage.
Why does a mouse born in a cage run on that little wheel?
And taught her children the mantra,
Your pain only makes you stronger.
Except that's not actually true. That's not the message this movie is trying to project, as we can see with our hero, Natasha.
Pain only makes us stronger.
Put a pin in that. So, what do we know about Natasha from the flashback? She was placed on a sensitive mission with presumably one of the best widows, as well as the Red Guardian and a younger trainee. She must have shown some uncommon aptitude to be placed on this mission.
That one, she has fire in her.
And she clearly learned from Melina, likely leading to her future success as one of the best widows.
Well, I made a name for myself.
But despite this, she did not learn Melina's lesson. Instead, she managed to
keep your heart.
But how is Nat able to keep her heart when perhaps no other widows have been able to and survive? Well, for one, we learn that Nat's real mother had similar traits.
She was like you in that way. She was relentless.
Her mother certainly loved her and wanted her, something her peers probably do not share.
Children who don't have anyone to protect them.
But I think more than that is the family relationship in Ohio. It may not have been real, but Yelena is right.
You were my real mother.
And the fact that Nat and Melina go to talk while Yelena and Alexei talk is probably how family dynamics were in Ohio, meaning that Nat learned a lot from Melina and not just how to be the best widow. Instead, she was certainly aware that Melina did not want to return to the Red Room and shared her feelings.
I'm sorry.
Melina found it inescapable and accepted her fate, but Nat was not going to do the same.
You're not a mouse, Melina. I chose to go west to become an Avenger.
So Natasha learned from her mother figure and grew beyond her, actually fulfilling the desire to escape.
Time that I spent posing, I was trying to actually do something good, trying to be more than just a trained killer.
But unfortunately, her attempt to bring down the Red Room did not work.
And you checked the body? Confirmed the kill?
There was no body left to check.
And made things worse. The younger generation of widows is now fully controlled by Dreykov.
I'm talking about chemically altering brain functions.
Thanks to Melina and Natasha bringing that capability back with them.
We stole the key to unlocking free will.
Melina and Alexei were obviously more culpable here, but Natasha was part of that.
I need you up here.
And worse, with Natasha's escape, Dreykov ensured that no one else would.
And you? You got out. Dreykov made sure no one could escape.
Thus, even if Nat got out of the situation, the cycle is not broken and continues at a higher degree than it did for either Nat or Melina.
The world functions on a higher level when it is controlled.
And that brings us to Yelena. An older widow does break the cycle for her, and Yelena escapes. She has the opportunity to be like Natasha, to run and build her life around her newfound freedom.
Where are you gonna go?
I don't really have anywhere to go back to, so I guess anywhere.
And that is what she's doing when Nat comes back. They air out their grievances in a way that, siblings do.
Stay down! Stay down!
Peak sibling behavior. Anyway, Yelena then outlines all of the ways she has been let down by Nat.
I kept checking the news, expecting to see Captain America bringing down the Red Room.
Truth rarely makes sense when you omit key details. And here you are, not so sure. Where did you think I was all this time? No one's even looking for him, thanks to you and Alexei.
And Nat, being our hero who has kept her heart, realizes that Yelena is right and decides that she is going to have to make amends.
Speeches aren't really my thing.
Oh.
It was more like an invitation.
Similarly, Yelena lets go of her chance at freedom to ensure that her sisters will have the same chance.
To go to the Red Room and kill Dreykov?
Yeah.
So, Melina survived by learning to excel within the system. Natasha forced her way out, but left it worse than she found it. And Yelena was left to struggle with the horrible situation.
And those agents you chemically subjugated around the globe? That was me.
And you? You got out. Dreykov made sure no one could escape.
Until an older widow freed her at the cost of her own life, and Yelena ran away to hide. That's pretty bleak, to be honest. But then the climax of the movie comes, and all three of them get to make up for what they've done. Melina ensures that the Red Room physically comes down.
Precisely what I was thinking.
Natasha gets them what they need to free all of the widows. Yelena frees these widows and is the one to kill Dreykov herself. Thus, they permanently end the destructive cycle and destroy the oppressive system.
Is he gone? He's gone.
I suppose that it may have been considered bad optics to have our Avenger murder the villain, but I do think it makes far more sense for Yelena to do it. There is another MCU film explicitly about generational trauma, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. It is mainly about Peter Quill and his father.
Is he cool?
And his real father.
I'm Mary Poppins, y'all!
But we do also get the relationship between Gamora and Nebula.
Who wanted to win, and I just wanted a sister!
And they air out their grievances as well, though the real blame should be placed on their abusive father.
Because of you. Thanos pulled my eye from my head.
But one unfortunate thing is that neither of them get to be the ones to kill Thanos, or even be especially involved in defeating him, despite it having huge personal stakes for both of them.
I will hunt my father like a dog and I will tear him apart slowly, piece by piece.
Everything I hid about myself, he taught me.
So while Peter has the time to wrangle with how his daddy could love him and still abuse him,
He may have been your father, boy, but he wasn't your daddy. I'm sorry I didn't do none of it right. I'm damn lucky you're my boy.
this is not explored for the ladies.
You can stay with us and help them.
I will help them by killing Thanos.
In contrast, Black Widow ensures that the paternal trauma is addressed for everyone. And even though Alexei is the dad of the nuclear family, he isn't really their father.
You were his partner. You were his business partner.
Betsy.
Don't give
Dreykov is.
When you look into the eyes of a child you have raised,
He explicitly refers to raising Natasha and treats his own daughter,
you find it difficult to look at her. I do.
much like the other widows.
And she can do it. She's a perfect mimic.
And honestly, that's what makes people calling him a weak villain really miss this point. Just take this interaction between him and Nat.
Is this your haunted past? Really?
If this doesn't both make him terrifying and make you very invested in her defeating him, I don't know what to tell you. It speaks volumes to their relationship, to the point that some ladies I know cannot watch it again because it's too real. Dreykov is the instigator of the generations of trauma to these women, and also honestly to Alexei, to a lesser degree.
Put me in prison for the rest of my life.
And especially to his own daughter. But Natasha is here to break the cycle. This is another point of guilt for her, like abandoning the other widows, and she's determined to make up for it.
Can she hear me?
You want to tell her you're sorry?
And she does.
I'm sorry.
She frees Antonia from her father's control, and what does she say as soon as she's free?
Is he gone?
Yeah, the relationship doesn't need to be on the screen more than it already was. We can read between the lines to see how he'd treat his own child as just a tool.
I had to put a chip in the back of her neck.
And how he sees all of the widows as both his children and just more tools. It's quite horrifying. And unlike Alexei or Melina, there is no coming back from that. I'm generally a fan of redemption arcs, but Dreykov would never want to change and give up his power. And so there's really only one way that his story can end.
This was fun!
Thus, the generational trauma is actually healed and the cycle is broken. And especially important is this scene. Natasha was just apologizing for not coming back for Yelena, and then...
I should have come back for you.
You came back for us.
the other widows come back. The newest generation do what the previous two could not. And as we see in the Hawkeye series, Yelena continues that mission of freeing everyone who went through what she did.
Melina will need to copy the formula, but you should be the one to tell him it's over.
I spoke at length in the previous video in this series about how painful it was for Natasha to die in Endgame, how frustrating it was to lose all that potential and have it treated like her story was over when it never had a chance to exist.
I thought about her every day of my life.
But now we finally get to see it.
Besides, if it can work out with the four of us, there may be some hope for the Avengers.
I'm still not happy with how it was handled in Endgame, of course. However, the emphasis on healing trauma throughout this film, between all of the characters, and the way it honors Natasha and shows us people who love her, it does a lot to heal me too.
Don't worry, I got this.
I know.
So, overall, this is absolutely one of my favorite movies, ever, but certainly in the MCU. It honestly needs some more love because the script is so good. There's humor.
Everybody good?
I am clearly injured.
There are a lot of emotional moments.
And none of you told me.
The action is intense. It deftly handles some pretty heavy scenes.
How are you controlling me?
I'm going to be scandalous here and say that it might actually be better than Winter Soldier, if only because we get reconciliation in the end, where we are left hanging in that movie.
I'm just being humble. It was all me.
Obviously, I'm a big fan of Natasha, and this movie is a love letter to her, incorporating the best stuff from her other appearances and confronting the worst. It includes multiple comics references and honestly feels a lot like reading one of her best stories. It's wonderful to see her finally get her due.
It means so much to me that you came back.
This movie is not only a wonderful representation of Natasha, it also improves her role in the MCU overall. I'm going to talk about this in my next video on that, but I do want to point out how this movie explains why she was able to go from the emotional low point in Civil War to being ready to face Thanos in Infinity War. And that's quite lovely.
Take care of yourself, okay?
Don't worry, I got this.
I know.
I talked in my last video about how Nat's wants versus her needs are let down in Endgame, but here they actually work. Nat wants to be left alone, to be independent. She needs to reaffirm who she is as a hero and to be treated like she has value. Alexei telling her this,
"Your ledgers must be dripping, just gushing red,"
is mostly a joke that she does not appreciate, but it does lead to her reconciliation with her family, reminding her who she is and what she's capable of, because they do all love her. She is not just an agent to them.
Hard to shake the double agent thing, huh? Sticks in the DNA.
I couldn't be more proud of you.
I didn't raise my girls to fall in traps.
They bring down the Red Room with her because they understand her and trust that she'll keep them safe. Which is exactly what Nat needs at this point, giving her hope for the future.
If it can work out with the four of us, there may be some hope for the Avengers.
And if this is the last time we ever see Natasha, I'm glad it's like this, where she's optimistic, confident, and loved. Alright, thank you for letting me talk about the best appearance of my favorite MCU character. Upcoming videos, I'm almost done with the one on Belle and the one on Jasmine, and then I will have another video on Black Widow in the MCU overall. So please like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, join my Patreon to make me do these a little faster, and all those things so you don't miss it. See you then!